Hey, try this on for size for a recruiting pitch. Come to North Carolina where you can play in front of more eyeballs than being in the NBA Finals. Sound far-fetched? It's not. I'm going to explain why on today's episode of Locked On Tar Heels.
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there! It is Thursday, June 9th, 2022. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or your first watch every single day. Please don't forget that we are free and available anywhere you get podcasts. So please go ahead and subscribe right now and smash that like button while you're at it for those of you who are watching. Well, friends, on Tuesday of this week, a guy named Danny Neckel, at dneckel, Neckel 19 on Twitter, he posted this list, and it is the list of the 9 most viewed basketball games of the year so far. So for 2022 up through June 7th would have been Tuesday. These are the 9 most viewed basketball games, college, pro, whatever, anything else, any semi-pro, anything there may be. And what those top 9 games are so far. By that point, NBA Finals Game 3 hadn't been played yet, as it was last night with the Celtics pulling out a victory at home. And so we don't know where that game will fall on this list. But let me give it this list to you, and you'll see it pop up there on your screen as well for those of you who are watching. I'm going to go in reverse order here. So this is the 9th most viewed basketball game of 2022. Will go all the way up to number 1. All of these have over 10 million views. Number 9, Purdue versus St. Peter's. That was in the Sweet 16, the NCAA Tournament, 10.1 million views. Number 8, Duke versus Arkansas in the Elite 8, 10.3 million views. Number 7, Villanova versus Kansas in the Final Four, 11.2 million. Number 6, Duke versus Michigan State, second round of the NCAA Tournament, 11.2 million. Hey, here we go, an NBA game. What do you know? Number 5, NBA Finals Game 1, 11.4 million. Number 4 on this list, NBA Finals Game 2, 11.9 million. So we're jumping up a little bit here. Then we come to the top 3. Number 3, UNC versus St. Peter's Elite 8 of the 2022 NCAA Tournament, 13.6 million viewers. Number 2 on the list, UNC versus Duke, Final Four National Semifinal, 16.2 million viewers. And then number 1 at this list, the national championship game, North Carolina versus Kansas, 17 million viewers. And so, that was a list of the 9 most viewed on TV basketball games of 2022, regardless of what level it is. So, in this first segment, I want to look at, on a general level, what do you see or what do you hear when you see this list of 9 games is named off? Well, there are 2 NBA games, the finals, game 1 and finals, game 2, and then 7 college games. And so here is my first big point, my first big takeaway of today. Friends, college basketball is alive and well. It's simple as that. For the NBA, just 2 games on this list. And notice, they were only the finals. Keep in mind, this is all of 2022. So everything from January 1st up through June 7th, that would have been when this was tweeted on Tuesday. And so that could include conference championships, conference semifinals, any of that from the NBA. Nope, none of it is on the list. You got the 2 NBA Finals games that had been played so far and 7 games from the NCAA Tournament. But it's not just like the Final Four. Notice it was 7 games, and they were all from several rounds. Of those 7 games, we had one second round game, the round of 32, one Sweet 16 game, Elite 8 games, Final Four matchups, and the national championship. And so people are tuning in all throughout the NCAA tournament to see all this, and it is all of those are scoring bigger numbers than any of the rounds of the NBA playoffs before the finals series. So yeah, college basketball is alive and well. I'm just going to keep hammering that home. I believe the win or go home nature of the NCAA tournament has something to do with this, right? With the NBA playoffs or NBA regular season games. There's not the same level of like anything can happen in a one game playoff format. And so my speculation is if we get to game 7 of the NBA Finals, for example, let's just say the Celtics and Warriors back and forth this whole series and we get to game 7, that's going to put up a big, fat, huge number. However, I do want to point out at the same time, between the 4 conference semifinals matchups in the NBA playoffs this year and the 2 conference finals series, so that's 6 total, right? 4 conference semifinals, 2 conference finals. Of those 6 series, half of them, 3 of them went to a game 7. That would be Dallas over Phoenix, Boston over Milwaukee, and then Boston over Miami. None of those game 7s made it onto this list. So yeah, that game 7 one-game format might be intriguing, but it's still not doing college basketball numbers. Why is this? Well, I'm going to put my cards on the table and say definitively the college basketball game is more compelling than the NBA game. And I know there's people listening out there that wholeheartedly disagree with me, and that's fine. But I'm saying that, and I believe it, and I back it up. Sure, the NBA is infinitely more talented, right? Like, I am not refuting that by any stretch of the imagination. Literally, any given year, the worst NBA team would demolish, wipe the floor with the best team in college basketball. Like, unequivocally, that's a thing. But college basketball is just more interesting. The stories of these college basketball players, of these teams, of these coaches overcoming things, it just draws eyes and ears in a way that the NBA often doesn't. The team camaraderie, the way teams rally together, the way a team you've literally never heard of till Selection Sunday, if you're just Johnny Q basketball fan, can come out of nowhere and turn into this crazy entity that makes a run. The way players come out of obscurity, whether it's a player you've never heard of or a sub off of one of the better teams comes in and has the game of his life or her life to turn something around. It's these stories like, oh, I don't know, this little team from Chapel Hill, North Carolina that was an 8 seed in this past year's tournament and then all of a sudden goes on this epic run. The NCAA tournament, friends, is just simply more entertaining and compelling than the NBA could ever be. Now, I also recognize there's probably some of you out there saying, it's a small sample size from this year with getting back to normal basketball, and the NCAA tournament was normal this year. Remember, 2021, the NCAA tournament was in a bubble in Indianapolis. It was not normal, and so great. You want a bigger sample size? Let's include every every basketball game, regardless of level, from 2021 and 2022. You want the top 5 list from that? Great, I'll give it to you. Number 1 on that list, UNC versus Kansas, the national championship game this year. Number 2, most viewed basketball games, any level, 2021 or 2022. Baylor versus Gonzaga, the 2021 National Championship. Number 3, UNC versus Duke, this year's Final Four. Number 4, UCLA versus Gonzaga, that crazy Final Four game in 2021 with the half-court buzzer beater as the buzzer sounded. Wow. That's number 4 on the list. And then number 5 on the list, the 5th most viewed basketball game of the past 2 years, 2021, 2022, UNC versus St. Peter's, this year's Elite Eight. It's the 5th most watched basketball game in the past 2 years. So I don't care what kind of sample size you're looking at, college basketball, and specifically the NCAA Tournament, is more viewed than any NBA game. Now, you might think, whoa, we got all these national brands, Kentucky and Duke, and they get all the love as the media darlings, the biggest brands, the biggest brand names in the sport. But neither of those teams, neither of those schools, neither of those programs were part of any of the top 3 most viewed basketball games in 2022. Well, I should say Duke was part of one of them, but only because there was one school that was part of all 3 of the top most viewed basketball games of this year. Who was it? Well, I'll give you one guess. If you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, you know exactly who it is. We're going to tell you who that is in just a minute, but let me tell you a little bit about BetOnline first. BetOnline.net is your number 1 source for all your sports betting stats and info. Find all of the latest sports developments, news, and odds, including the NBA Finals going on, NHL Hockey Conference Finals, Major League Baseball, and of course all the latest fighting news from MFA and UFC to boxing. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering info, including live betting, esports, and more. So head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about all the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. So we just talked about how college basketball is alive and well, and I want to look back at this list some more, specifically at the top 3 games on the list. Number 3, North Carolina versus St. Peter's Elite Eight this year. Number 2, North Carolina versus Duke Final Four this year. Number 1, North Carolina versus Kansas, number 1 in most viewed basketball game this year. The top 3 games on this list of the most viewed basketball games at any level of 2022 all involve North Carolina. Spread it out to that other list we just looked at. All of 2021 and 22, North Carolina's in 3 of those top 5 games most viewed in that span. And also I want to point out, not only are they at the top of the list, but there's a big separation. There's this demarcation line between that 3rd most viewed game, North Carolina versus St. Peter's, and 4 through 9 on this list. 4 through 9 range all in the 10 to 11 million viewed range. But then you jump to UNC St. Peter's, 13.6 million views. That's almost 2 more million views than was the spot right behind it. And then we jump from UNC versus St. Peter's to UNC versus Duke, number 2 on the list, 16.2. That's just shy of a 3 million viewer jump. And then finally the UNC versus Kansas National Championship at 17 million. And so there is a big, it's like if we were tiering these top 9 out, it would be these top 3 and then everything else. And sure, I know there's the argument for, well, yeah, of course that happens because it's the Final Four in the national championship. Yeah, but one of these 3 games is North Carolina versus St. Peter's. Raise your hand if you heard of them ever before this year's NCAA tournament. No. So here's what all of this tells me. If the first point I wanted to make today is that college basketball is alive and well, this is the biggest one and the reason you came here for this podcast. North Carolina is alive and well. The Tar Heels are alive and well. The University of North Carolina is alive and they are kicking, and Hubert Davis has things rolling. You telling me that North Carolina doesn't move the needle? UNC absolutely freaking moves the needle, and everyone wants to come and watch them. Also, keep in mind, even though these Final Four games are inflated, it's not just because it's Final Four. Like, Kansas and Villanova was on this list, but it was 7th on the list. It wasn't top 3 or even top 4 or 5. And here's what else is crazy, too. This year's Final Four, both Final Four games and the National Championship, were all on cable, either TNT or TBS. If it had been a year where the games were on CBS, a national network, a national broadcasting company that anyone can tune into versus having to have cable, can you imagine what these numbers would have been? So just keep that in mind. Take where they actually fell and enlarge those numbers. So the big question then becomes, why on earth did this happen? Why is there such a separation between these 3 games involving North Carolina and the rest of the pack? And then everything else beyond that. All the rest of the NBA games, all the rest of the NBA regular season and playoffs, the rest of the college basketball season, the NCAA tournament, all of that. Why did this happen? Well, I think precisely these 3 games. Keep in mind, Carolina played 6 NCAA tournament games, and the first 3 aren't on the list. And there are 2 games that are on this list of top 9 from before the Elite 8. And so there was one round of 32 game and one Sweet 16 game. So why did this happen? Why are these 3 games so watched, so viewed? I think part of it is storyline. When we look at the Elite 8 game, North Carolina versus St. Peter's. Wow, 15 seed in the Elite 8 with a chance to go to the Final Four. Like, this is literally historically never been done. This is unprecedented. And people want to tune in to see if Cinderella can keep on wearing the glass slipper a little bit longer. They didn't, and Carolina waxed them. But I think that is part of why this game got such a big number. What about UNC Duke? Why did that game get such a big number? Well, of course, everyone's tuning in for the first ever matchup of North Carolina Duke, Coach K's potential last game, and yes, hashtag we did ruin that retirement party. So there's a big draw there. And then also UNC versus Kansas in the national championship. 2 blue blood programs who have shared one of the best coaches in college basketball history, and it's the national championship game. So like, there are some storylines that make these 3 games stand apart. Some of why these games did such a big number is Carolina, remember, they were an 8 seed. And so the fact that they are doing what they're doing as an 8 has not happened very often itself in NCAA tournament history. So that's part of it. But another part of what's going on here, I would equate it to, let's say there's a game where there's a team that usually shoots 3-pointers really well, and they don't shoot it really well on one given night. They just don't shoot what they usually do. Well, a lot of times a broadcaster or somebody will say, oh, they're just missing their shots tonight, and we'll chalk it all up to that team missing their shots. While at the same time, we have to stop and credit the other team's defense, right? Because certainly that had something to do with it. Translation? People want to watch North Carolina in a big way. It's not just the storyline of these other teams that they're playing or the scenario. There's a horde of people out there tuning in to watch North Carolina. And maybe, just maybe, if you'll bear with me, Hubert Davis is putting out a super fun team on the court with a super fun system that makes the nation want to tune in and see. Yeah, it's a lot of NBA concepts at the college level, but it's fun, and these Tar Heels are doing a lot of neat stuff, and they're engaging and dynamic. And the Brady Manek of it all, the Armando Bacot of it all. Maybe people just really like the Tar Heels. Yeah, I can get behind that. Now, here's something else interesting to me about this list. I'm surprised the first not the first North Carolina Duke game of the season. I should say the one that was at Carmichael, the last regular season game of Coach K's career when North Carolina went in to Cameron and beat that. I'm surprised that one didn't do a number big enough to make this list. And I know it was on cable as well, on ESPN. But as much as ESPN hyped up this game, as much as everyone else made it a thing, I'm just surprised that it wasn't on the list as well. But it wasn't. But here's the probably biggest story to me of what this means long-term for North Carolina, all this viewership. Hey, recruits, you paying attention? You listening? You watching? You tuning into what's happening? You want to be seen by the most eyeballs on the biggest stages? Come to Carolina. Do you want to be seen by playing on a team that scored bigger numbers 3 times in the NCAA tournament than any NBA game this entire season, finals or anything else? Come to North Carolina. So here's the pitch for you. I'll say it again. I said it in the cold open. Hey, why don't you come play at a place where you can be seen by more eyeballs than even playing in the NBA finals? That's North Carolina. I mean, that sells for these guys that their ultimate goal is to make the NBA. You want to be seen by as many people now as you can be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now? Come to Chapel Hill. I don't know about you, but that combined with what NIL can get me in college, I'm strongly considering that, even if I'm a one-and-done type talent. And what's awesome about that, and you've heard Hubert Davis say this summer, there's a lot of people that want to come to Chapel Hill. And so Coach Davis is going to have his pick of the litter. He's going to get the guys that he wants. Sure, there's going to be competitions. There's going to be recruiting battles, and he's going to lose some of them. Undeniably so. But he's going to get a bunch of others as well. So college basketball is alive and well. North Carolina is alive and well. But those aren't the only two entities that are alive and well. There's another one, a marginalized group that's doing just fine, thank you very much. Who is that? I'm going to tell you about that group in just a second. One more group that is alive and well. But first, I want to tell you about the ultimate NBA mock draft that starts on June 16th, coming up next week. Man, that's going to be awesome. With over 50 insiders, nothing equals the ultimate NBA mock draft. The Locked On NBA Big Boards draft experts plus the Odyssey insiders coming together, and they're going to do this big NBA mock draft leading up to the NBA draft. So the first pick for this is June 16th. You can search Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and follow now so that you don't miss a single pick. College basketball is alive and well. The North Carolina Tar Heels are alive and well. And Cinderella is alive and well as well. A big part of the intrigue of the NCAA tournament every single year is Cinderella, particularly the first weekend of the NCAA tournament. You know, we've got first round all happening on Thursday and Friday, second round all happening on Saturday and Sunday, and that pairs it down to the Sweet 16. And so people go in and pick all sorts of fun upsets that happen, but usually we pick those for the first and second rounds, and then they fizzle out in favor of the biggest names, the biggest brands in the sport, the major conference teams that are going to win out over the Cinderella darlings that have been part of the first weekend. People love to tune into that first weekend to see that upset pick, right? We kind of live and die with it, even if we got nothing on it other than we just wrote their name on a bracket somewhere. But we just want to see these upsets. It's so fun, unless it's our team, of course. But then by the second weekend and the Final Four weekend, we want to see this better high-level brand of basketball. That's what the media markets want. That's what TV execs want, is to have the biggest names and the biggest brands playing in the biggest games. We want that so we can get the best basketball, so we can get the most eyes in front of it. Because a lot of times Cinderella makes it to the second weekend, or on rare occasion the Final Four, and they just get trounced or walloped, kind of like North Carolina did to St. Peter's this year. But it doesn't always happen. And here's the misconception, is that when Cinderella makes it further and deeper into the tournament, we start to not get as many eyeballs on the TV. But what what these numbers prove out on this list that we have, the fact that North Carolina versus St. Peter's is the third most watched basketball game of 2022, regardless of level. Like, are you comprehending that with me? That same game is the fifth most watched game over the last 2 years. North Carolina versus St. Peter's. Many times Cinderella is going to come in clobbered. But there's people tuning in because it is intriguing and interesting, and Johnny Q basketball fan wants to see, who is this team I've never heard of? Who's this crazy dude with the mustache? Not Drew Timmy, I'm talking about Dougie Eddard, jumping up on tables as a substitute in a game. It's so much fun to see this happening. And so here's why I want to bring this up, because there are some circles lobbying for D1 in basketball to be cut down. There are 350 some teams in D1 basketball. And while the mantra that we trot out often is to say, hey, everyone's got a shot at a basketball national championship, because all you got to do is win your conference tournament, and then you make the NCAA tournament, and then you just win 6 games and you have a shot at it. But let's be realistic. Not everyone has a shot ever at a national championship in college basketball. It's just not, it's not a thing. It's not going to happen. Even though there is more parity, the talent pool is still too many of the most talented guys still going to the biggest brands. And so a lot of people, though, are advocating for this split, similar to how we have FBS and FCS in football. Yeah, it's all D1, but it's split in half into the haves, and not the have-nots, but the have not quite as much as is as the haves. And I got to be honest, I myself have thought and suggested this, that hey, maybe it's time for us to split D1 in basketball into 2, maybe even 3 divisions. 100 or so teams each. With that way, you just have better opportunities for the little guys. Maybe even have a relegation plan where teams could move up and down. That'd be a lot of fun. But if we were to do that, at what cost would it come? We wouldn't have our St. Peter's or our Oral Roberts's, our Florida Gulf Coasts, any of these types of schools. We would not have that intrigue that comes along with our 68, I wish it was 64, whatever, our 68 team bracket, with teams from all over the country, where you've got St. Peter's knocking off Kentucky. I mean, come on. If we cut this thing in half and we don't let St. Peter's have a seat at the table, we miss out on some of the greatest storylines that college basketball has ever had to offer. And so I think St. Peter's getting in and doing what they did this year helps remind people of how great this is when it can happen. And the fact that this game with North Carolina is showing up near the top of this list, hopefully is a helpful reminder that people still tune in even when it isn't the highest or biggest or best brands nationally. And so hopefully, I think we should keep it, man. Like, just keep it going, because if we cut it down, these great stories go by the wayside. And keep in mind, some of these guys that are the best players at these smaller schools that pop up out of nowhere are now the guys that you cheer for in the NBA. We're watching Steph Curry right now in the NBA Finals, has become the greatest three-point shooter in the history of the NBA. But if Davidson hadn't been in the 2008 tournament, how different would that trajectory have been? How different would Steph Curry's life have been if they hadn't almost made the Final Four as Davidson and Bob McKillop? So you know what, friends? College basketball, it's alive and well. The North Carolina Tar Heels are alive and well. And Cinderella, she's alive and well, and we got to keep her going. We got to fight for that. College basketball, and specifically the NCAA tournament, is the best sporting event we've got going in this country. And I'm glad that these viewing numbers we looked at today help prove just that very truth. Boy, what a fun thing to get to talk about, to look at these numbers. I just think stuff like this is so interesting, and I love the stories that these numbers can tell us about college basketball, about the Tar Heels, and about Cinderella. Now, coming up on tomorrow's show, tomorrow, Friday, we're about getting ready for the Tar Heels, Diamond Heels, to be in the Super Regionals at home in the Bosch, taking on Arkansas, the Razorbacks. We're going to hear a lot of woo pig suey, so I'm going to have to get you ready for that. We're going to look back at the regional round last weekend. It's going to be awesome. Thank you so much for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listen or your first watch today and every day. Please don't forget that we are free and available anywhere you get podcasts. So you can go subscribe right now, wherever you listen to those. If you're watching, hit the subscribe button, smash the like button, leave a great comment, what you think about today's episode, anything about these college basketball numbers, and why you love college basketball. Or maybe you like the NBA better. I'd love to hear that as well. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. You can follow me on Twitter at Isaac Shade, ISAACSCHADE. Now that you've made this your first listen, let me encourage you to make Locked On NBA Big Boards your second listen of the day. Rafael Barlow and all the guys bring you an in-depth look into the biggest prospects, the latest player rankings, mock drafts, and of course, big boards. So follow the Locked On NBA Big Board podcast anywhere you get your podcasts, Odyssey, YouTube, wherever it is. Hey, thanks so much for spending part of your Thursday hanging out with me, talking about why the Tar Heels are at the top of the heap in college basketball. You know it, because it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. Until tomorrow, peace!